What's the matter? Bring us more sake. We're to call some girls and have ourselves a party. You just keep making that sushi.
I'm sorry, but we can't do that. A thug who had come to my sushi restaurant was threatening me, refusing to leave even though we were past closing time. The dim lights of the restaurant cast long shadows across his face, making him look even more menacing.
Kid, who do you think you're talking to? Do you know who I am? I'm of the Rossetti family. You've heard of us, right? The Rossetti family?
Wait, the mob? My voice trembled slightly as I spoke.
This is our territory now. Boss's orders. You better start paying protection money.
The thug grabbed me by my collar and started poking in my ear while making his demands. The strong smell of alcohol in his breath made me nauseous. I closed my eyes, expecting to be hit, but the punch never came. Instead, I heard the voice of Mr. Thompson, one of our regular customers. His calm tone cut through the tension like a knife through fresh tuna.
Ah, a Rossetti family, is it?
Shut up, old man.
Mr. Thompson, get out of here! That's what I wanted to say, but I couldn't find my voice. The words stuck in my throat like poorly prepared rice. However, Mr. Thompson didn't seem fazed by the thug at all. Because Mr. Thompson was... Let me start from the beginning. My name is Kevin Anderson. I'm 45 years old, but the stress of my recent years has probably added a few gray hairs to my temple that make me look older. My family has been running the sushi restaurant for generations, and we've always had a reputation as one of the finest sushi establishments in the city. The restaurant, Anderson's Traditional Sushi, sits on a quiet corner of downtown. Its wooden facade standing out among the modern glass and steel buildings surrounding it. In this age of conveyor belt sushi chains, with their flashy tables for ordering and plates that zoom around on automated tracks, it's been challenging to maintain a traditional business model. The sight of those chain restaurants, their bright lights and cartoon mascots, sometimes make me wonder if we're dinosaurs in a modern world. Still, thanks to our skilled chefs and willingness to innovate while maintaining our standards, we've managed to stay relatively successful by offering something different from the chains. Our wooden counter, worn smooth by decades of use, tells stories that no conveyor belt ever could. Being a generational business comes with its complications, and I was raised to be the heir. Every morning of my childhood, I would wake up to the sound of my father preparing rice, the gentle swoosh of water and the click-clack of wooden containers becoming as familiar as my own heartbeat. When I was very young, maybe 6 or 7, I admired my father and grandfather and the vibrant atmosphere of the restaurant. I would stand on my tiptoes trying to peek over the counter, watching their hands move with practiced precision. One particularly busy evening, I couldn't contain my excitement anymore. "Dad, I'm going to become an awesome sushi chef like you and stand behind that counter." "Oi, kid's going to inherit the place, huh? That's called the sushi bar, you know." A customer who always sat in the same spot told me. He was a regular named Mr. Yamamoto, who had been coming to our restaurant since before I was born. "Really? I'm definitely going to stand at the sushi bar and make everyone happy with delicious sushi," I declared, practically bouncing with enthusiasm. My voice must have been too loud because my parents scolded me and told me to wait in our house behind the restaurant until dinner. I still haven't forgotten that moment. The embarrassment mingled with determination. However, as I grew older and started helping at the restaurant, training under my father, those childhood dreams gradually faded like rice paper left in the sun too long.
"Wrong,"
my father would say, his voice sharp as his knife.
"How many times do I have to tell you? You handle the rice that much, it'll become too dense. Today, you're only doing rice prep and tamago again."
I wasn't allowed to make sushi for a long time. The days blended together in an endless cycle of rice preparation and egg cooking. My hands would ache from the repetitive motions, and my pride would sting from the constant criticism. I would practice alone after closing, only to be scolded again before opening. The silence of the empty restaurant would be broken only by the sound of my knife against the cutting board, and my occasional frustrated sighs.
"Your cuts aren't even,"
my father would say the next morning, examining the remnants of my practice sessions.
"A true sushi chef must be consistent."
The cycle continued until my 6th year, when I finally mastered a traditional tamago, egg omelet, well enough to be allowed to stand at the sushi bar during business hours. The recipe had been passed down through generations, requiring precisely 18 folds and the perfect balance of sweet and savory. By then, my father's strict training had made me lose my love for sushi. When I finally got to stand at the counter I had once dreamed of, I felt more relief about potentially being yelled at less, rather than excitement. The wooden counter that had once seemed magical now felt like a barrier between me and the life I might have chosen for myself. Around the time my frustrations about being a sushi chef and my issues with my father were piling up, my mother passed away from illness. The cherry trees were blooming when we received the news, their petals falling like tears outside the hospital window. She had always been frail and frequently hospitalized. During her stays, she would insist on having the hospital bed positioned so she could see the restaurant's lights from her window, saying it gave her strength to see the family business continuing strong. Though the doctors had told us to prepare ourselves when she actually passed, it hit me harder than I had imagined. The restaurant felt emptier without her gentle presence, without her quiet humming as she arranged flowers for the counter each morning. My mother was always smiling, often telling me, "Your father is actually really happy you're considering the restaurant." She would always listen to my complaints. She had a way of smoothing things over between my father and me, like applying the perfect amount of wasabi to balance a piece of sushi. "He practices making your favorite rolls when you're not around," she once told me with a conspiratorial wink. "He wants to surprise you when you master a new technique." Unable to process my feelings, I continued running the restaurant with my father in a gloomy atmosphere. The regular customers noticed the change, the absence of my mother's warm greetings and the increasing silence between my father and me. Then, while cleaning the restaurant one day, my father collapsed from illness and passed away. It happened so suddenly. One moment he was wiping down the counter, telling me I had missed a spot, and the next? They say when someone dies, they often take their loved ones with them, but I never expected to lose both parents so quickly. The universe seemed to have a cruel sense of timing. After my mother's death, I felt disgust toward my father who, though understandably, had reopened the restaurant after just a few days and continued working as usual. We barely spoke for months, the silence between us filled only by the mechanical sounds of knife work and food preparation. Before I could properly mourn my parents, I found myself as both owner and head chef, making sushi. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders like a heavy coat I wasn't ready to wear. It wasn't just about making sushi anymore. The artistic side of the craft that I had once dreamed about became overshadowed by the practical concerns of running a business. New menu development, business strategy, dealing with suppliers who had raised their prices after my father passed, despite their apologetic manner. I was clearly overwhelmed by all the responsibilities. Each day brought new challenges: inventory management, staff scheduling, equipment maintenance, things my father had handled so seamlessly that I had never even noticed them. In this state of constant stress, I started losing control of my emotions at the restaurant. The pressure would build up like steam in a rice cooker, until I would explode over the smallest things. One day, while discussing suppliers with our head chef, Tanaka-san, who had worked alongside my father for 20 years, things came to a head. "No! We can't make a profit if we source from there!" I insisted, my voice rising with each word. "I went to the place you mentioned, but we can't maintain our quality with their products," Tanaka-san replied calmly, his experienced eyes watching me carefully. That's when I lost my temper. The stress of the past months, the grief, the uncertainty, it all came pouring out at once. "I checked it myself! That place is fine! If we can't make a profit, I can't pay your salary! Are you willing to work for free?" I shouted, slamming my hand on the counter. The sound echoed through the empty restaurant like a thunderclap. With arguments like these, the chefs who had admired my father started leaving one by one. First Tanaka-san, then Yoshida-san, and finally, even young Matsui, who had just completed his apprenticeship under my father. Each departure felt like another failure, another step away from my father's legacy. With the departure of our veteran chefs, we lost the ability to recreate my father's style. The subtle techniques, the little tricks that made our sushi special. They all walked out the door with those experienced hands. Moreover, my attempts at new menu items weren't successful. I tried to modernize, to compete with the conveyor belt places, but our traditional customers weren't interested in fusion rolls and modern presentations. Even our regular customers who had been concerned about me and liked the restaurant started coming less frequently. Mr. Yamamoto, who had encouraged my childhood dream, stopped coming altogether. The last time I saw him, he just shook his head sadly and said, "Your father would have understood that change isn't always progress." However, there was one regular customer who still came faithfully 2 to 3 times a week, like a lighthouse in the storm. It was an elderly man named Mr. Thompson, who always walked in with a cane. His measured steps across our wooden floor had become as much part of the restaurant's rhythm as the sound of knives on cutting boards. He always sat at the furthest seat at the counter, probably so he could sit comfortably. From there, he would watch the entire restaurant with keen eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Mr. Thompson had always ordered shad and tamago, nothing else, no matter what seasonal specialties we offered. It was as if he was conducting his own quiet assessment of our fundamentals. "Welcome! The usual today?" I would say, trying to maintain some semblance of the warmth that had once filled our restaurant. When I'd say this to Mr. Thompson as he made his way to his seat, he would just nod and sit down. His silence was different from the awkward quiet that had fallen over the restaurant. It felt more like patience. I would first prepare the tamago and bring him some tea. The routine of it was comforting, like finding a familiar pattern in chaos. One particularly quiet evening, with only a few customers scattered at the tables, I found myself confiding in him. "Thank you for always coming. But with things as they are, I might have to close the restaurant."
Is that so? Your tamago is so well made.
He said with a sad expression. There used to be a saying that you should always try the tamago first at a sushi restaurant. They say you can tell the skill level from the tamago. So whenever Mr. Thompson started the tamago, I felt like he was testing my abilities, measuring me against some standard I couldn't quite see. "Thank you for being such a loyal customer all this time." Saying this, I returned to the sushi bar, prepared the shad, and combined it with a few seasonal items before bringing it to Mr. Thompson. My hands moved with the familiar motions automatically, muscle memory taking over where a conscious thought failed. As he stood at the register later that evening, Mr. Thompson spoke as if reminiscing, his voice carrying the weight of years of observation.
It's natural that you can't be like your father right away. You stood at the counter many times longer than you have. Even your father was terrible when he started. Don't you think it's too early to make that decision?
But I was always getting yelled at by Dad. I just don't have the talent. The words came out bitter, like poorly prepared wasabi.
Parents tend to be strict with their children because they have high expectations. There is no point in scolding someone who shows no promise.
His eyes met mine steadily as he spoke. Really? I wonder if he ever praised me. The question had haunted me for years. Mr. Thompson gave a slight smile at this. The kind of smile that suggested he knew more than he was saying.
I remember times when he did, but I suppose unpleasant memories tend to stick with us more. It's a shame, considering how you once dreamed of standing at this counter. I think you can do it.
Saying this, he paid his bill and left before I could respond, leaving me to ponder his words in the quiet restaurant. When I got home that night, I entered my father's room, which I hadn't been in since his passing. The space still held his presence, from the faint scent of rice vinegar that seemed permanently embedded in his clothes, to the precisely arranged tools on his desk. True to his nature of being strict about organization, the room was spotlessly clean. Everything had its place, just as he had insisted everything in the restaurant stood of its proper position. On his desk, I found several notebooks. They were worn at the edges, obviously well used and frequently referenced. They were his diary and some recipe research notebooks. The pages were filled with his precise handwriting, each character formed with the same care he had brought to slicing fish. While I felt hesitant about reading the diary, human nature makes forbidden things more tempting. Thinking there might be something about me in there, I opened my father's notebook with trembling hands. In the diary, there were date marks with red circles. These were entries about me, standing out against the neat black characters like spots of blood on a white cloth. Kevin seemed so down after losing his mother. I don't know what to say to him. He was making sushi with a gloomy expression today that I ended up scolding him again. I'm sorry. His sushi today was the best he's ever made. I almost told him it was excellent, but somehow managed to keep my expression neutral and just said it was okay. Kevin still has a room to grow. When I read these unexpected words from my father, I felt tears welling up. The pages blurred before my eyes as I realized how wrong I'd been about his feelings. Was this how my father really felt about me? All those times I thought he was being needlessly harsh. Had he been struggling with his own inability to express his feelings? I looked through his other diaries, going further back, my hands shaking as I turned the pages. His tamago was delicious today. Maybe I'm just being a proud parent, but I think I can trust him with this. He has the touch for it, just like his mother said he would. Today, Kevin said in front of customers with sparkling eyes that he would someday stand at the sushi bar. Though he might consider different paths in the future, it made me very happy. I wonder if the day will come when we can make customers smile together. Going way back, I found this entry. The ink slightly faded, but the words still clear and powerful. Between Mr. Thompson's words and these entries, I could finally understand that my father's anger came from his expectations of me. His harshness had been a mask for his hope, his criticism a twisted expression of love. While wiping away my flowing tears, I kept calling out, "Dad! Dad!" to my father who I could never speak to again. The words echoed in the empty room, carrying years of unspoken feelings. What had I been seeing in my father all this time? The stern taskmaster? The impossible to please parent? Had that been real? Or just my own insecurities reflected back at me? Had I really been listening to his teachings? Or had I been too busy feeling resentful to hear the love beneath the criticism? I must have cried for hours, letting out years of pent-up emotion. The notebooks fell open on the floor around me, each page a testament to my father's hidden feelings. After some time, I suddenly felt my motivation return, like a fire being rekindled. I'll try again tomorrow, I thought. I can always give up and close the shop later. But first, I owe it to my father, and to myself to truly try. From that day on, I began experimenting daily to recreate my father's style. The kitchen became my laboratory, and each failed attempt taught me something new about what my father had been trying to show me all along. Looking at the notebooks my father left behind, I studied his techniques. His notes were incredibly detailed, not just recipes, but observations about seasonal changes in fish texture. The effect of room temperature on rice consistency, even how humidity affected the nori's crispness. When I tried to make sushi, I could hear my father's voice in my head saying, "Wrong, be quicker." And remembering him brought tears to my eyes again.
The knife should feel like an extension of your arm,
he used to say. Now reading his notes, I understood he wasn't just talking about technique. He meant that making sushi should be as natural as breathing. I washed my face once more, thinking that my father lives on in my heart. We'll make customers smile together. Every morning, I would bow to his photo on the family altar, light some incense, and promise to do better than the day before. With that thought, I kept making sushi endlessly. Each piece was a conversation in my father's memory, each slice an attempt to understand his teachings better. A month later, my efforts paid off, and the restaurant's reputation began to recover, gradually bringing in more customers. Word spread through the neighborhood that the Andersons were returning to its former glory. Some days, there would even be a line outside before opening. While more customers were good, it also meant more troublesome ones started showing up. The resurgence of a traditional restaurant in a changing neighborhood attracted all sorts of attention, not all of it welcome. Word spread online that the successor had changed completely, becoming more cheerful and energetic. Food bloggers started posting reviews, and local news outlets did small features on our renaissance. Unfortunately, these reviews caught the attention of some unsavory characters. Thugs started coming in, and their behavior got worse by the day. They would swagger in during busy periods, demanding immediate service and the best seats at the counter.
Hurry up, you're too slow,
they would shout, disrupting the peaceful atmosphere we tried to maintain.
What's your problem? Got something to say?
They would intimidate other customers who dared to look their way. They would harass nearby customers like this, causing significant trouble for the restaurant. The elegant dining experience we prided ourselves on became tense and uncomfortable when they were present. I had hired service staff as the restaurant got busier, but they were scared of the thugs, and when I had to deal with them myself, it delayed service to other customers since no one was making sushi. Young Sakamoto, our newest server, had almost quit after one particularly aggressive encounter. One day, when Mr. Thompson was heading to his usual seat, his cane accidentally touched one of the thugs, causing a small commotion. The sound of wood against leather echoed in the suddenly quiet restaurant.
What's this decrepit old man doing? Old man, go home and eat some porridge. Sushi's too tough for your dentures, right?
They laughed mockingly, their voices harsh against the traditional background music we played. I tried to intervene, my heart racing as I watched the situation unfold, but Mr. Thompson said,
My apologies. You're right. Maybe I should have some porridge.
By backing down, he prevented the situation from escalating. There was something in his manner, though, a dignity that made his apology seem almost ironic. Later, when the thugs had moved to a table, I approached Mr. Thompson at his usual spot. Mr. Thompson, I'm so sorry about today. Your meal is on the house. Please come again. I bowed deeply, feeling responsible for his discomfort. When I said this during his payment, Mr. Thompson smiled gently and said,
That was scary. I'm relieved nothing serious happened.
There was something in his eyes, a glimmer of steel beneath the grandfatherly exterior. He left his payment despite my offer and departed, his cane tapping a steady rhythm on the floor as he walked out. While I was happy the restaurant was thriving, I worried about how to handle the thugs, as they were causing problems for other customers. Each day brought new anxiety about what they might do or say. I considered going to the police, but since nothing had been broken and we had been explicitly extorted, I wasn't sure how they would act. Unless they actually damaged property or physically threatened someone, there's not much we can do, the local beat cop had told me privately. Then one day, the thugs came as usual, but stayed until closing time. The evening had been particularly busy, and they had positioned themselves at the center of the counter, making it difficult for other customers to enjoy their meals. They had ordered more alcohol than usual and were clearly drunk. The sharp smell of sake mixed unpleasantly with the subtle aromas of fresh fish and vinegared rice. I decided to send the part-time staff home earlier than usual. Going home, Sakamoto-kun, I told our young server. I'll handle the closing duties tonight. He shot a worried glance at the rowdy group but left as instructed. Only Mr. Thompson and the thugs remained in the restaurant. Unusually, Mr. Thompson hadn't left yet and had ordered alcohol, which was rare for him. He sat quietly at his usual spot, occasionally sipping his sake and watching the scene unfold with those keen eyes of his. When I told the thugs we were closing, they became confrontational in their drunken state. The leader, a young man with bleached hair and an ill-fitting suit, stood up suddenly, his chair scrapping loudly against the floor. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut off a sushi knife as the confrontation continued. The thug's bleached hair caught the thin lighting, creating an almost ghostly effect as he swayed slightly from the alcohol.
What's the matter? Bring us more sake. We're to call some girls and have ourselves a party. You just keep making that sushi.
My hands were trembling slightly, but I tried to keep my voice steady. I'm sorry, but we can't do that.
What? Can't? This place is doing well thanks to us.
The thug's face was flushed red from the alcohol, his words slightly slurred but no less threatening. No, please, you're causing trouble. I glanced at Mr. Thompson, wishing he would leave for his own safety, but he remained perfectly still at his seat, watching the scene unfold with an unreadable expression.
Huh? Kid, say that again?
The thug took a stumbling step forward. Please, leave! I'll call the police! I reached for the phone behind the counter, but before I could grab it, the thug lunged forward.
Kid, who do you think you're talking to? Do you know who I am? I'm with the Rossetti family. You've heard of us, right? The Rossetti family?
The name hung in the air like a storm. My throat went dry. Wait, the mob?
This is our territory now. Boss's orders. You better start paying protection money.
His breath reeked of sake as he leaned across the counter. What are you talking about? I tried to maintain some composure, remembering my father's teachings about dignity even in difficult situations.
Are your ears working? Money! Money! Hand it over!
The thug grabbed me by my collar and started poking in my ear while making his demands. The pristine white of my chef's coat wrinkled in his grip, and I could feel the threatening pressure of his fingers against my neck. I closed my eyes, expecting to be hit, but the punch never came. Instead, I heard Mr. Thompson's voice, clear and commanding in a way I'd never heard before.
The Rossetti family, is it?
The gentle, elderly man I knew was gone, replaced by someone else entirely.
Shut up, old man!
The thug hurled insults, but Mr. Thompson remained unfazed, sitting straight back at the counter like a judge at his bench. Mr. Thompson seemed different somehow. The transformation was subtle, but unmistakable, like watching a sheathed sword being slowly drawn.
Making young ones do such things.
Mr. Thompson's voice carried a weight of authority that seemed to fill the entire restaurant. I was surprised by this different side of Mr. Thompson. Even more surprising, he started making a phone call while completely ignoring the thug's insults. His usual gentle voice was gone, replaced by a commanding tone as he shouted in the phone. The change was as dramatic as watching a calm sea suddenly reveal its storms.
Get over here right now, you idiot! What's wrong with our young guys?
What?
This is my favorite sushi restaurant. If you can't control your men, You don't deserve to be called boss.
The words echoed off the wooden walls of the restaurant. Even the fish in the display case seemed to tremble at his tone. Shocked by these words, the thug seemed unsure how to react, half believing what was happening, and finally letting go of me. His hand dropped from my collar as if it had been burned.
The boss is coming now. If you're really with the Rossetti family, you can wait, right?
Mr. Thompson's words carried an unmistakable edge beneath their polite surface. Overwhelmed by Mr. Thompson's intimidating presence, they froze in place like fish caught in ice. The previously routed group stood silent, their bravado melting away under his steady gaze. The boss arrived quickly, so quickly that I had wondered if he had been waiting nearby. The bell above the door chimed as several men in dark suits entered, their footsteps silent on the wooden floor. One of the men accompanying the boss rushed to Mr. Thompson, leaving his boss behind. His polished shoes squeaked slightly on the floor as he hurried over.
Former boss, are you hurt? It's been a while.
The respect in his voice was palpable.
Oh, these guys really from our family?
Mr. Thompson's question carried the weight of years of authority.
They are new recruits. Seems they were trying to make a name for themselves with half-baked knowledge.
The man's expression was a mixture of embarrassment and concern. After glancing at the boss, he added, his voice dropping to an apologetic murmur.
It's not really the boss's fault. They're so new, he hasn't even probably met them yet.
The man seemed to be considering the consequences as he spoke up for his current boss, like a teacher making excuses for a struggling student.
Just using our name makes it his responsibility. Everyone's still babying him. That's the problem. Causing trouble for civilians is the worst. Do you know what this could do to the family?
Mr. Thompson's words cut through the air like a perfectly sharpened knife. He scolded the boss while maintaining direct eye contact, the kind of unwavering gaze that my father used to give me when I made a serious mistake at the sushi bar. The boss glared at the thugs, but being in a similar position myself, I could understand the unspoken message in that pressured silence. You got me scolded. You'll pay for this. It was the same look I used to see in the mirror after my father's lectures.
So, how are you going to handle this?
Mr. Thompson's question hung in the air like steam over a hot rice cooker.
Handle this? Could you please watch your language in front of civilians?
Boss's response was quick, almost desperate. Approaching the thugs who were now practically melting into the floor, their drunkenness completely gone. The boss spoke with carefully controlled anger.
I hear you use my name without ever meeting me. I'll teach you the weight of those words.
With that, the thugs were taken away by the men, their footsteps shuffling against the floor as they were let out. The bell chimed again as the door closed behind them, the sound somehow final and ominous. Whether because I couldn't keep up with these developments, or because my senses were somehow off from the stress of the situation, I found myself muttering, "Wonder how they'll handle it." When I caught myself and looked at Mr. Thompson, he was smiling slightly, while the boss was glaring at him for his earlier choice of words. The relationship between them was becoming clearer with each passing moment. The remaining boss and Mr. Thompson then apologized to me, both bowing deeply.
I'm very sorry for my trouble my men caused you.
The boss's voice carried genuine regret. Mr. Thompson pointed to the counter, telling him to sit, and began lecturing him with the same tone my father used to use of me. The parallels were impossible to miss. The boss seemed to shrink smaller and smaller as he hung his head. Each word from Mr. Thompson seemed to carry the weight of years of experience and expectations.
How many times have I told you to keep better track of your men?
Mr. Thompson's voice was stern but not unkind.
A leader must know what his people are doing at all times.
Yes, father.
Words slipped out naturally, confirming what I had begun to suspect. Watching their interaction, I realized their relationship. They were father and son. The scene before me was like looking into a mirror that reflected my own past. Mr. Thompson had retired, and his son had taken over as the new boss. Their dynamic was so familiar it made my chest ache. The stern father, the son trying to live up to the expectations, the weight of a legacy passed down. As I observed them absently, I saw myself in the hanging head of the boss, and my father and Mr. Thompson. The parallel was so perfect it almost made me laugh. Here was another father and son, separated by expectations and traditions, yet bound by them too. I waited for a break in Mr. Thompson's lecture to serve some tea. The familiar ritual helped calm my nerves, and the gentle sound of liquid being poured seemed to ease the tension in the room.
Oh, right. It was closing time. I'm sorry for causing more trouble.
Mr. Thompson's voice had returned to his usual gentle tone. The transformation so complete it was hard to believe he was the same person who had commanded such authority moments before. If you'd like, would you care for something to eat? Don't worry about the time. You've always been so kind to us. I found myself offering before I could think better of it. The muscle memory of hospitality took me over.
Is that so? The shad and tamago here are exquisite. You should try them.
Mr. Thompson turned to his son, his voice carrying a hint of pride as he spoke about the restaurant. While making sushi at the counter, I glanced at Mr. Thompson and said, as if talking to myself, maybe it's not my place. Someone once told me that people scold others because they have expectations for them. They say they don't bother scolding those they see no future in. The rice felt perfect under my fingers as I shaped it, and for once, I could appreciate the years of practice that had made this movement so natural. Mr. Thompson hurriedly tried to explain.
Well, that's...
His flustered response revealed that they had indeed been his words, spoken on a different evening when he probably thought I wasn't really listening. I used to think I was worthless because my parents scolded me, but once I understood it was because they had expectations for me, I realized it was their way of showing love. I carefully placed a perfectly cut piece of shad on the rice as I spoke. The boss didn't look at Mr. Thompson, but he smiled slightly as he ate the sushi. In that moment, he wasn't a mob boss. It was just a son trying to make his father proud, just as I had been. "This is delicious!" His eyes widened slightly as he tasted it, and he showed me a genuine smile. The kind of smile I used to hope to see on my father's face. I remember the notebook my father left behind. In it were traces of him planning different menus, imagining us working together at the sushi bar. His neat handwriting had mapped out future possibilities he never got to see realized. I never got the chance, but while your parent is still alive, show them lots of appreciation. Even parent and child can't understand each other's feelings if they're left unspoken. As I said this, I felt my eyes growing wet again. Looking at the father and son before me, I could see the chance they still had, the opportunity I had lost. The tears started forming in my eyes, probably because I was thinking about my father and all the things we had never said to each other.
It's delicious. Just like your father's style now. Your father must be smiling in heaven. Preserving and continuing in this restaurant. That's the greatest way to honor your parents.
Mr. Thompson's words hit home, and I couldn't hold back anymore and started crying. The boss awkwardly offered me his handkerchief, while Mr. Thompson sat quietly, allowing me this moment of emotion. In that quiet sushi restaurant, late at night, 3 men who had all struggled with their father's expectations shared a moment of understanding. A few weeks later, several of our former chefs returned to the restaurant. The word had spread somehow that things had changed, that I had changed. Even the chef I had yelled at, Tanaka-san, came back, saying as soon as he saw me, "You look different now. Please let me work with you again." His familiar presence at the cutting board felt like coming home. When I apologized for my previous behavior, he just said, "Let's do our best together." The smile of acceptance in his voice meant more than any formal apology could have. The restaurant became even more vibrant than before. The harmony of multiple knives at work, the sizzle of preparing tamago, the quiet conversations of satisfied customers, it all blended into a symphony my father would have loved. And after that incident, Mr. Thompson never came alone anymore. The boss started joining him at the sushi restaurant regularly, their relationship growing stronger over plates of shad and tamago. Today, as always, I pray at my parents' Buddhist altar and say, "I'm heading out," with enthusiasm. The morning sunlight catches the edge of my knife as I begin preparing for another day. Making sushi, seeing customers smile, and smiling myself. I hope this continues in this restaurant forever. Each piece of sushi I make is a letter to my father, telling him all the things I never said when he was alive. Hoping that carrying on the sushi restaurant my father left behind is my way of honoring his memory. I pick up my knife and begin another day's work. The sound of steel against the cutting board rings clear and true, like a bell announcing that finally, I understand what my father was trying to teach me all along.